Hey everyone, it's Pork Chop Express here from MiSTerAddons.com, and we're coming at you today with another tutorial, this time how to assemble the acrylic case from MiSTerAddons.com. You'll see here I have a DE10 Nano, fresh out of the anti-static bag. I have some hardware, a heatsink, SD RAM. I have the IO 5.6 XL board with an Noctua fan and the obnoxious fan cable. I have a USB bracket, USB hub 1.2, and then some light pipes and acrylic buttons. I also grabbed 2 quarters, and you'll see why here in a little bit. I have here a 5.5 metric driver to drive the standoffs, and a number 1 Phillips. And of course, we have here our acrylic case. So let's get started. First, you're going to want to take a copy of Kurt Russell and Kim Cattrall in Big Trouble in Little China, as directed by John Carpenter. And you're going to want to set it just off camera just a little bit for inspiration. Prop it up, look at it if you get stuck. It'll help you. Next, we're going to take the DE10 Nano, and we're going to remove the stock acrylic plate. Just these 4 Phillips screws on top. Okay, once you have that done, gently set aside the acrylic plate. And next we're going to want to, before we forget, take our heatsink, peel the adhesive off of the thermal interface material, and position it on the Cyclone 5 chip, like so. Support from the bottom, put a light amount of pressure. Just make sure the heatsink has good contact with that Cyclone 5. Next, we're going to grab our SD RAM with these 3 pins going into here. And we're going to, supporting from the bottom again, just wiggle it in there. There we go. Now for the fun stuff. Let's go ahead and take off these standoffs, these female to female standoffs, and we're going to do that using this bit here. And you can probably do it by hand or with pliers, whatever. We will not be reusing these, so it's safe to just discard them. Save them for another project, whatever. As long as it's not Raspberry Pi. Let's do. Flip it over. Last one. Okay, next we're going to open up our bag and we'll go through some of the hardware that we have in here. Keep track of all the 4 Phillips screws and the 14mm male to female standoffs. So many pieces of hardware. Okay, we're going to want to take the 14mm standoffs. Well, let's group them all together first. These are 16mm standoffs here. They're a little bit longer. We have 4 14mm standoffs. If I can separate them here. Like so. 4 6mm standoffs. Like so. We have 8 nylon washers. We'll get into that later. We have 4 rubber bumpers. That's our very last step, so we'll put those aside here. 4 nuts, next to last step. Okay, so now we have 8 14mm male to female standoffs, and we have 4 16mm, and those are the ones that go on top, so we'll set those aside. So take your DE10 Nano, one corner at a time, and mate one 14mm with the other. Now you don't need to use any special tools for this, just finger tight is fine. It will do the job. Okay, once you have all 4 of those in there, go ahead and take 4 nylon washers, 1 on each standoff, and mate them like that. Now we're going to take our USB hub, and this is a USB hub 1.2, and we're going to make sure that the micro USB port is directly under the micro USB port on the DE10 Nano. So this is the orientation you want to put it in. If you put it the other way, your bracket's not going to work. Okay, so get that ready, set it aside here. We're going to get out this USB bracket. This is a pretty cool device. You know, when the USB hubs first came out, everything had a cable. Nowadays, with the 1.2 design, Storage came up with a way to connect this using the pin headers that this has as an option. Now I still sell the cable variety. It still works and everything, but most people prefer the pin header at this point, myself included. It's easier for me to make the pin header version as well. Okay, so we're going to take this. We're going to slide the micro USB port into there. Oh, just dropped a standoff or a washer. Okay, washers are on. Now this is probably one of the trickier parts in the install. We're going to carefully get the M through standoffs through the holes in the corners. You kind of have to do it gently because some will want to go easier than others, and sometimes the standoffs are a tiny bit crooked. So while you're doing that, pay attention to these header pins here going into the header socket, and you're going to want to just gently push down. Now I meant to bring something, but in a little bit I'll go back and I will gently push down on this socket head just to make sure. Oh, even with my finger now. There we go. So you can see there, it's important to note that there's no contact between the header and the bottom of the DE10. That's super important. And second most important is that you have a good connection to these pins here. So like that. Next, we're going to take these little 6mm standoffs and thread them on one at a time. Now these things are funny because there's variation in them, and one of the reasons to use these washers, even if you're not going with the header, is that sometimes these 14mm don't thread all the way into these, and then you have a gap there only on 1 or 2 of them, and it doesn't look as nice. Last one. Okay, so at this point, we have the SD RAM, the DE10 Nano, we have the heatsink, USB hub, and our bracket plugged in. Now these 2 pins, you can hardly see them there. You bridge those if you want to send 5 volts to your board and power it through this port. It's not recommended. Still use the Y adapter, a power cable in the back here, and plug both in, or 2 separate power supplies if you're really crazy. Okay, so at this point, we're gonna set this assembly aside, and we're going to, one more thing. Let's go ahead and put this IO board on top. And so to do so, you see you have these 10 1x10 header socket here that mates with these pins. So go ahead and take and just gently mate those together. If you're using much force, you're doing it wrong. Just a little bit of force supporting the DE10 Nano with your thumb, kind of rock it into place. Same thing over here. Okay. Make sure you're flush on all of your standoffs here. And we might as well put these last 4 standoffs in up top. And again, you're gonna have to play around with it a little bit, but I put 4 extra washers in to give you a little bit of spacing, so that when you put the case together, there isn't a gap between these standoffs and the case, because they only sell, well, these standoffs are hard to get in general in the US. You have to order them from China, and it takes a while. So I ordered the 16mm, and that's pretty close, and so these washers bridge the last gap there is between the case and the standoff. Get all 4 of those done here, just finger tight. And at this point, we are, I'd say, about halfway done. I guess less than half if you count the time it takes to peel the paper off the plastic, which I've left up to you in most cases. Some cases may come pre-peeled because they were test specimens, so I would do quality assurance on them to make sure that the design was right, everything was good. Okay, so now this is the point you should be at. All right, time for the fun part. I left the paper on the case simply because A, it's way too time consuming for me to do it, and these are already a little bit delayed going out, so I just want to get them into customers' hands. And B, it protects them during shipping. And when you order things from from online laser cutter places, they do ship with the paper still on them. In fact, they ship you the whole sheet. They don't even peel these apart from the frame, so you have to do all the work. So this is at least better than that, but it's really not too bad. It takes a few minutes and a little bit of patience. And if you're one of those people who loves peeling plastic, this is kind of a similar thing, I suppose. Start in the corner, peel it back a little bit, try to peel diagonally and just slowly so the paper doesn't tear, and then you're not going back afterwards trying to fix it. Notice the paper sometimes is torn on the back. That comes from when I have to pull the pieces out of the frame. Sometimes the paper, the adhesive melts back together and then it doesn't tear quite as nicely, but as you can see, the pieces themselves are in perfect condition. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, you might have seen that this is actually not my first laser cutter. The first one I had seemed to be working fine, and I made the mistake of stepping away from it and it caught on fire, melted my laptop. Part of the reason that these cases are so delayed is because I had to order a second one. So unfortunate, but a good learning opportunity for anyone doing something similar. I knew better, but I figured this one time won't hurt, and sure enough, thankfully no damage to my property, just some smoke. Got the trusty ozone generator out and ran it for a couple hours and just touch up some paint, and it was in the garage, so no big deal, unfinished garage. But a close call for sure, and a important lesson learned for me. This is the most fun piece to peel. I say that sarcastically. Struggling here. All right, and with these ones, I do try to go with the direction of the lines for the most part. So then I'll come over here and try to peel it this way. And that way, the tiny pieces of paper don't completely tear. For now, I'm not gonna bother getting all little pieces in the etched areas. Not for this video. Once you put the case together, it's easy enough to go around and just do it with your fingernail. This is acrylic, so of course, if you scuff it with something, it will scratch. There's really no way around it. There are different finishes I could get potentially in the future, but hopefully, while this is portable, I assume most people are leaving it on their desk or putting it, in front of their TV, and it kind of stays where it is, except for when you have to plug it in, because this thing doesn't have a power button. But in the future, that should change. Not totally confirming, but okay. So there we go, last piece. Ooh, look how shiny that is. And you can see I put my website and the year I made it. No copyright. I will release the design files for this, but I just want to make sure the first several customers who ordered like it, give me some feedback on it. If little things need to be tweaked here and there, I'll make sure that they are happy. And yeah, you guys have been very supportive. Guys and girls have been very supportive with my small business here. I just started it up in, late last year. I started making boards for myself, and I sold 9 of the 10 that I made and realized, I should probably just order some more. And just like that, started it up, started soldering, got a reflow oven, solder, got 3D printers, print, got a laser cutter, fire, and then a whole bunch more laser cutting. And so who knows what the future holds. I have some other things in the works, some MiSTer related, some not. I've been into video games pretty much my whole life. Got my first Nintendo NES in about 85. And since then, it's just been kind of one thing to another, with some breaks for college and, real life. But now that I'm an official adult, I can go back and be a child again. I'm sure you can relate. Okay, so what we're gonna do, we have all those peeled. Again, I didn't get all of the pieces of protective paper in between the lettering, but that's fine. What we want to do is position our DE10 Nano stack and thread the standoffs through the holes, just like that. You'll see they come through nicely. And then take our 4 M3 nuts. All of this hardware is M3, by the way, M3 0.5 pitch thread, in case you want to get more. Take that. And just for now, I'm going to do it finger tight. I don't have my 5.5 millimeter nut driver with me, but for now, having it loose is not a bad thing. Okay, so all 4 nuts, and we're just gonna stand it here like this. Now, so this knock to a fan cable is a real pain, but it's too time consuming to resolder the cable for each one. It can be installed like this. We just have to tuck it to like this to the side. There's enough room in between this and the top of the case to work. So let's go ahead and start. This thing puts together, like all 4 walls kind of have to come together at the same time. So it's a little bit tricky, but I have faith in you. So go ahead and take the first piece, kind of put it into the side here. Doesn't have to be super tight. Put the second piece here. There's really no order, just whatever. I do it a little bit differently each time. We're going to fight with that fan cable a little bit. Just be gentle. It'll all work out, I promise. Okay. Now we have the front, well, what I consider the front, with the Ethernet port where the buttons are and the LEDs. Seems like a good front to me. And so with these face panels, if you have the sides already in there, it doesn't really want to go in. So you have to kind of pull the sides up a little bit on each side, like that, and then try to work the face panel in, and you have that USB bracket kind of in the way too, but we're gonna get this. Just be gentle and patient. You may want to loosen the nuts a little bit, give the standoffs a little bit of wiggle room, and that'll help kind of get past this little, see we're getting caught right there, but it's as tight of a fit while still working as I could get it, so we will persevere. There we go. Cleared that, got the front. Okay, back in business. Okay, and now just the rear panel. Same thing here. Going to want to pull up these side panels from a complete mate with the bottom. Sorry about the squeaking of the plastic, that's just the way it is. And you're going to want to get this thing started, get the back panel started, and then kind of push down, push it all together. There we go. Just like that. Okay. Now comes the most challenging part of all of this, and it's really not that bad. Let me explain. Inside this bag, you'll find these buttons that have been very challenging to make, but I really wanted to make a 100% acrylic case. You'll notice they have a scuffed up side, potentially. That's the bottom, and they have a clear side, which is the top. So I tried to make them as pretty as I could. Spent way too much time trying to get these right. Unfortunately, when you cut thick material with a laser, it kind of cuts it wavy on some of the faces, and so I had to go ahead and kind of flush it up with a Dremel and a 3D printed chop saw, although maybe in the future I really want to cast the buttons, but for now I'm just happy to have these as is. They look pretty good. They're just very time consuming. And we're going to take this plastic bag, we're going to take some quarters, and we're going to take our light pipes, and the frosted end, I don't know if you can tell, but the light pipe kind of has a frosted side and a clear side. The frosted side goes up because that's where the light is going to refract and glow. And we're going to just push it through gently. These holes are also very tricky to cut because you're dealing with hundreds of a millimeter of tolerance to where the light pipe goes in, but doesn't slide out. So it's a friction fit, and you may have to play around with it a little bit. Like I said, I've had good success. It's kind of usually just a matter of getting past the first bit. And if that doesn't work, try coming from the back side. There we go. Okay, so what we have here is we want to get the spacing somewhat uniform and consistent. And there are obviously multiple ways of doing that, but what I like to do is use something like quarters that I have a lot of because I have an arcade machine, and just kind of gently put the light pipes in between the quarters, gently push down, gently, almost no force at all. Okay, now we have light pipes sticking out uniform amount. Now the last thing we need to do is put these buttons on, put the top on, and screw it all together, and then put these feet. I hope you're still with me. Okay, so these light pipes have these rings on them so that they can't fall out of this once they're through. If you flip it upside down. And so these are actually tiny acrylic rings. I think it's 9.8 millimeter internal diameter and 12.25 external diameter that I cut on my laser cutter, and then I have to acrylic bond them together. Like I said, in the future, I'd really like to cast these buttons because casting them is just gonna save me a lot of time and hassle. Okay, so you're gonna put the buttons there, pushing gently on, oh, there we go. Let's try that again. It may take a couple times getting it, but once it's in, you're good to go. So go ahead and gently push on the side, position it, Try to lead by getting the buttons through the holes first, if possible. You may need to adjust them a little bit with your finger. There's really no better way to do this that I could think of. I suppose you could flip it upside down, try to put the case together like that. Maybe that's smarter, but this is the way I do it. Okay, so I have the buttons in there. So now gently mate the panels together and work your way down the case, and we have connection. So before you get too excited, go ahead and make sure the buttons are free. Make sure your fan cable's not being pinched here. Just give it one last inspection. And now this is the most dangerous part of the whole procedure. We now need to take all 4 of these screws and connect them to the standoffs here. And this was kind of the challenging part of designing this case, was figuring out how not to use too many screws and how to take advantage of the standoffs that are already there. So I'm going to take my bit and a screw, and I'm going to, with the most gentle force possible, just fingertip, okay? If you screw this down too hard, it will crack. We don't need to torque it down, just barely finger tight is sufficient. And you might find the standoffs are just a slight bit crooked, so you'll have to thread the screw in at a little bit of an angle. What I like to do is I like to use, I think this is a #1 Phillips bit, and what that does is it helps make sure that you don't over tighten it, because the bit will slip out of the screw head before it gets to that point. So if you see here, if I try to over tighten it with this #1, it'll spin in the screw head. Okay, one more screw. Thanks for hanging with me today. It's cloudy outside. Got some comments on my last video about white balance, and honestly, I'm just filming this on my phone. I have some Canon DSLRs. My wife has been a photographer for 10 years, and I help her with weddings and whatnot, so I know my stuff. Video is not really my thing, and this is just, I have very little time, so this is just a matter of getting it done, getting it uploaded. Really probably not going to edit this at all, even though I've made mistakes in it. All right, so what I do is I put one of these adhesive dots right next to each of these standoffs and nuts. Remember, don't press too hard. It's not like you're gonna crack the case, but you don't want scuff marks on your case you just spent 20 minutes putting together. All right, now you can see there the buttons are not flipping over. They're not falling out when you flip it over. Good friction, everything works. All the ports are exposed. Sync on green switch is there. This is for the ADC in, which is the audio headphone jack in. You have here a little cutout for getting the SD card out, because on the first case it always bothered me when you put the USB hub on it, there's hardly any room to get to it. And because the acrylic is 3mm thick, I had to make these holes bigger, because otherwise the USB plugs, the VGA, Ethernet, the housing of the connector wouldn't clear, the back shell I should say. So I have tested all these ports, and I made the HDMI one bigger for fatter HDMI cables. Lots of iterations of this thing to get it to where it is. You can see here, this is a super clean installation, almost no protrusion from the USB bracket. And there you have it. Thanks for joining me, and stay tuned for the next one.